Hello everyone, welcome back to the Zach GP channel, and in today's video I have another post FP2 video for F1 Fantasy heading your way. So if you've never watched one of these videos, what I go through is the most up-to-date data possible to be building the best teams for you around every Grand Prix weekend. So this time out it will be heading into Vegas. To my left you will see the increases and decreases that every driver can have on the budget side of things. Now just remember, the further we get into the season, the less and less it affects you. Realistically, unless you're like 0.6 million away from the desired team you want, it doesn't matter too much anymore to an extent. And I'll be completely honest with everyone heading into this FP2 video, be very cautious to not lock in your teams before FP3, because I can still talk to you all about what happened in FP2 and what my thoughts are after it. However, I can tell you there was a lot of red flags. No one really got to do a proper soft run to show what they could do on like those quali laps. So a lot is still unknown this weekend. So just make sure, the biggest thing in F1 Fantasy, make sure you lock in once everything has finished. But with that all said and done, let's head over to my tier list of every single asset in F1 Fantasy this weekend for which drivers and constructors you should be bringing into your team. And then heading into the A tier drivers, for me, this is my ranking so far, and I'll talk about Lando Norris first. Lando Norris, he is expensive out there in F1 Fantasy. However, the run of form he's been on, he was top of the FP2 charts, which still is a good showing for him. I just think it'd be a little bit crazy to still not go with the base foundation of a two-times driver being Lando Norris for this weekend. But then everyone else, it's a little bit of where the hell are they going to be, because now you're a little bit worried about where everyone's pace is. I still think Mercedes look completely fine, so George Russell is my second option as if you can bring into A tier drivers, which most people can these days, you would go over to someone like him to complete your team of like a Norris and Russell. I really like the look of Russell. I think he's downplaying what Mercedes can do this weekend so far in the interviews. So keep an eye on George Russell. He's cheap for an A tier driver, so I'm excited to bring him into my teams. And everyone else for me is sort of a differential. Ferrari don't look like the way to go because they've had some issues with the car, and also we just haven't seen enough pace from them so far. Piastri just still doesn't look like he's going to be on Norris's pace this weekend. So again, if you had to pick one of the McLaren drivers, it'd be Norris over Piastri. And Piastri still doesn't look much better than anyone else, so I wouldn't really go near Piastri right now. And Verstappen, for me, is the differential option. It really is between Norris, Russell and Verstappen for me, purely because of the Verstappen effect. We never know exactly where Verstappen's going to be, and if anyone can pull it out of the bag, he's the one who can. Then heading into the B tier drivers, and this is where things get a little bit interesting for me, because it is such a toss-up. Now, like I mentioned, budget does not matter as much to an extent. If you have someone like a Gasly in your team, you shouldn't be going out of your way to take them out, because they're still going to get you that 0.6 million. But I wouldn't recommend someone bringing in Gasly unless you had them already in your team. That's the sort of thing where we are right now with the budget increases. However, Behrman, on the other hand, my favourite B tier driver heading into this weekend. He's just been on such a good run of form, and actually being lower down on the order in FP2 might do him favours, because if he starts further back on the grid, there's more chances for overtake points. And then the only other surefire good B tier driver for me is Kimi Antonelli. Antonelli's looked rapid right now. He's just such an awkward price where you've either got to go Norris, Antonelli, and do you trust him over Russell more? Or you have to drop Norris and go Russell, Antonelli, and someone else. And I think that's just going a little too much on the differential side. So if you can afford to bring in Antonelli, or more of you can't afford to bring in Norris, Russell, I think Norris, Antonelli, Verstappen, Antonelli still fine. However, it's just such a weird pricing he's at, which really makes it annoying to bring him into our teams. But then everyone else, yeah, it really is a toss-up. My favourites would be Sainz and Hadjar, just because from what we've seen in FP2, and also we tend to know that Williams and Racing Bulls do normally have pace, normally at the top end of the midfield. But someone like a Hulkenberg, who's shown a bit of pace right now, I'm okay to bring him into some teams. But again, it's such an unknown. Like, does he actually have that pace? I'm not I'm not willing to put my life on it. So again, it's one of those weekends where you can move your B tier drivers around. Just make sure your A tier drivers are the priority, because it looks like it's going to be a hard call in figuring out where we should put this 2 times. And then you go and look and go, oh, I still have Colapinto. Can I move someone up instead of having him, etc. Then heading into the constructor side of things, and it looks like another big 2 A tier constructor weekend. And it looks like with the base of what we've been running with still is the way to go of McLaren and Mercedes. McLaren consistently, we know throughout the season, just have looked incredible on pace. And from what we've seen so far, they won't be as slow as they have been at Vegas in other years. Mercedes, I think they're underplaying what performance they have, and I still expect them to be right up there. So I'm happy to sit on Mercedes as they're the cheapest of the proper A-tier constructors. So for me, it still very much is everyone should be bringing in McLaren and Mercedes. Red Bull and Ferrari didn't pull out anything enough to impress me, so I wouldn't see the reason to go over to any of them. And the B-tier constructor-wise, yeah, again, just no one impressed me enough to be like, ooh, maybe we'll have a look at bringing in a B-tier constructor. You could potentially say someone like a Haas or a Sauber just because of Behrman's recent form and Hulkenberg's FP2 outing, but I think that is going a little bit too much on the differential side of things. So if you had to go B-tier constructor way, it would be Haas for me as the best option. However, I don't recommend bringing in any of the B tier constructors. Then heading into the chips for Vegas, and it's a little bit of a weird one, because if you have 3 chips left, or hopefully you don't have more than 3 chips left, you've just got to use them up right now as quickly as you can. But there still is an order to things. I think autopilot is looking like a very good option here, because it's looking a little bit confusing on who's actually going to be fastest, and especially on a weekend like that, you don't know who you should be putting on 2 times. And let's say you have Norris and Russell, etc., or Verstappen Russell, autopilot gets rid of all of those issues of you needing to figure out if you need to change it. You can just apply that. A wild card works quite nicely as well if you're planning to use extra DRS in Qatar, because you can set your team up ready from Vegas heading into Qatar. But then the rest of them, like no negative, final fix, and extra DRS, I think extra DRS you shouldn't use just because it looks like Qatar could be a better option. So it all depends on what chips you do have left on you. However, it's not going to be a big chip weekend if you only have like 1 chip remaining. That all said and done, let's now head over to the fun bit of the video, the team selections. So heading into the first team selection for Vegas, this team really does show basically the best of everything that you can bring into your team heading into this race weekend. So you have Lando Norris, who would be your 2 times option. You also have George Russell for that potential of Mercedes being right up there as well, like last year. And then you also have the baseline of McLaren and Mercedes. Again, like I mentioned, Ferrari, Williams, Red Bull, none of these teams impressed enough to be put over both of these. So it still looks like the base of McLaren and Mercedes is the way to go. Then the B tier drivers is where I really want to focus the attention, because this is where it can change a lot from team to team. However, right now, this team is 138.8 million. This is the creme de la creme, right? Behrman, Hadjar, Sainz for me are probably the best scenario that you could bring in your B tier driver wise. However, you can work around this. I think Behrman is the must have in most of these teams until you get to a certain point. However, if you can't afford to bring in this team, all you have to do is follow this little ladder down, and you can do this for every team selection I'm about to show for this F1 Fantasy video. It would start off with Sainz for me, then you would head down to Pierre Gasly, and if you still couldn't afford Pierre Gasly, then you'd go Alonso, then down to Colapinto. And this is the same steps I'd take for most incidents when it comes to the B tier drivers. If you can't afford to have Hadjar in your team, all you do is go down to Gasly, then to Fernando Alonso, continue that trend. And then finally, if you physically can't afford to bring Behrman with this team, then you'd go Behrman down to Sainz, Sainz down to Hadjar, and then Hadjar down to Gasly. And then the line is drawn as Gasly, Alonso, Colapinto are the cheapest free B tier assets that you can afford to go with. And now we've brought this team from 138.8 million to 132.4. So a lot of people can work with this team variation. And if you want the differential version of this team variation, all you have to do is get rid of Norris and go over to a Verstappen. However, in this scenario, I would actually 2 times George Russell and not Verstappen, as I have more faith in Mercedes in Vegas than I do with Verstappen. But this is the differential route if you're trying everything and anything to try to find those small sliver of extra points, and it's your Hail Mary now. So if you want to bring in Verstappen, that's how I'd run it. Again, the B-tier drivers stay the exact same with the ladder. You start with Behrman, Hadjar, Sainz, and you can go all the way down depending on who you have in your team and who you can afford to bring in. It's super easy this weekend so far. We'll see what FP3 says again, because I do think those results will be very, very important for what we do with our teams. However, if you can't afford Norris and Russell, all you do is drop Russell down to Antonelli and you work from Norris Antonelli. And you do the exact same things that I've been talking about throughout this video so far, where you drop down Carlos Sainz first, follow that ladder all the way down to Colapinto. Again with Hadjar, you do the same down to Alonso, Behrman, down to Gasly. And now we're looking at teams more in the 120-ish million range, so it's a lot more affordable again. It then gets to this point where you'd have to go differential on the route of your A-tier driver or your A-tier constructor if you still can't afford this. So if you still can't afford a team like this, I'd either recommend going from Norris down to Russell if you do believe that the constructors on McLaren and Mercedes are a proper, safe, consistent route, which I do think is not a bad shout. Or you do the opposite, where you drop down the constructor from Mercedes down to someone like a Haas. Or you could go Racing Bulls, however my favourite is for Haas right now, just with the form they've been in. And that is as simple as it gets for the team selections this weekend. Like I mentioned, we haven't seen enough from any other team to be putting them in for the constructors, like a Ferrari, like a Red Bull. The differential wise, it looks like Verstappen just because he's got the Verstappen effect. But people like Piastri, Leclerc, Hamilton, I'm not really worried about bringing into my teams as well. B-tier driver wise, it looks pretty easy to figure out, where you've just got that ladder I mentioned before. It all depends on free transfers, who you already have in your team and who you can afford. And I can't stress this enough, make sure to make your decision after FP3, because that session is going to be very, very important now. And then for anyone out there who is going to run a limitless team, it's quite a hard limitless to figure out just now. However, this is the limitless I'd go for. It's triple McLaren, triple Mercedes with Verstappen. You could throw in a Ferrari like a Leclerc in the mix. I would recommend getting rid of Piastri if you're going that route, and it would just be Leclerc instead of Piastri. But those are both the ways I would go if you are planning to use Limitless. That is it, everyone, for this post FP2 video for F1 Fantasy. Now, I'm going to state it again for like the 1,000,000th time this video. Make sure you see those FP3 results, because they are going to be very, very important for our team selections. However, if you are struggling with any questions that you need help with, who do you think you should bring into your teams? When should I do my team selection? What should I do with this budget, etc.? Any comments that you have, make sure to leave down below and I'll help you all out. Remember, I will be live over on FanAmp an hour before qualifying, which is the deadline for F1 Fantasy, to answer any more questions. It seems like we might have a few more answers over on this live stream, so make sure to check in on that. If you are awake, for anyone who's in Europe or just around that, it's looking like a tough one for me, but again, just thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. I can tell you I'm going to edit this and then I'm going straight back to sleep, because I woke up at 4 in the morning to watch FP2 and it was bloody red flag for half of it. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Have a nice day and I'll see you all very soon.